Crimson Crossover Network. This is The Tide Machine with Charles Branch and Michael Southern. Welcome back to The Tide Machine. I am Charles Branch with Michael Southern. Alabama's off this week, but we decided to keep the Tide Machine rolling and are going to discuss some of our favorite players from Alabama's prestigious football history. But before we do that, we're fortunate enough to be able to talk about another Alabama victory from this past weekend as Wisconsin came all the way from the north and got to experience a little Southeastern football. Michael, I know you were at the game this weekend. It was hot, but how was your Saturday in Tuscaloosa?
It was a lot of fun. So it was just a spur of the moment decision late Friday night. I had not planned on going, and then something just kind of worked out really well. So I had a chance to get a ticket and went ahead and did it. Had a great time. Actually sat beside someone I used to work with years before unexpectedly. So it was just a perfect morning and afternoon, and Alabama played really well. I was glad to see how they executed. Sure, you don't want to give up the kickoff return. That was a little disappointing. You had the drop pass. But overall, a good, solid win for them with enough things for the coaches to chew on them a little bit about that we've got to get better before we go to Georgia in about a week and a half, 2 weeks.
Yeah, I think that was our first non-conference Power Four win in Bryant-Denny Stadium, now at Nick Saban Field, since the 2010 team played Penn State when they still had Joe Paterno. Well, obviously we had so many of those neutral site games during the Saban era. We had Texas 2 years ago, but I don't remember another Power Four conference or non-conference team being in Tuscaloosa since that 2010 game against Penn State.
That's a good point. I never thought about that. I have to go back and double check, but it sounds like, I mean, I'm sure you're probably right. And I remember that 2010 game. Mark Ingram was injured, so Trent Richardson got the start. And look, Alabama won that Penn State game, but I can tell you, Penn State laid some licks that game. That was a very physical game that Alabama won against Penn State back in 2010.
It was a very physical game. It was really cool because Bobby Bowden had just retired at Florida State. He was College Game Day's guest picker, so you had Bobby Bowden, Joe Paterno, and Nick Saban all on the field together pregame. Unfortunately for Penn State, that would be Joe Paterno's last season as they dealt with the scandal that would unfold later on in the year. I actually have here in my office. I just moved offices, so I don't have it hanging up right now, but I have a crimson and white, full page picture from that game with Preston Dial catching a touchdown pass. As we talk about favorite players, I'm going to put Preston in the honorable mention category. Got to know him in Tuscaloosa while we were down there. We actually worked somewhat in the same industry. Phenomenal guy, awesome to be around. Obviously got great stories, but he was nice enough to sign it for me when we got out of college. So I have that hanging here in my office from that 24-3 win against Penn State back in 2010.
No, I remember I covered that game. It was a very short press conference when they brought Paterno in. I was actually covering the visitors' locker room, and I was hoping to do a really nice long sidebar about Paterno and the Alabama rivalry. He literally came in for about 35 seconds, spouted off two really quick quips, and then just left because he was really mad for some reason. I guess he didn't like the score, but I remember that was the shortest post-game press conference from an opposing team that I could remember.
Well, I want to give a lot of credit to the Wisconsin fans from this past weekend. We had several of them around us where we were sitting. But of course, had to get to Tuscaloosa early. Didn't want to get in any traffic issues. It's one of those games, especially coming from Birmingham, that everybody's typically leaving around the same time for 11 o'clock kickoff. But being around the Wisconsin fans, first class, great sportsmanship. I think they really respected the fact of being in one of the great cathedrals of college football in Bryant-Denny Stadium at Nick Saban Field, getting to watch one of the more prestigious programs in college football history. And that's a very proud program too, of course, Wisconsin. They struggled a little bit recently, but they've been a team that's prior to the 12-team playoff. I know early on in the 14 playoff, we're making Big Ten championship games. We're in the discussions for making the 14 playoff. Have a lot of history when Barry Alvarez was coach. Had some successful stints with Brett Bielema and Paul Chryst, of course. But the guys around us were just, asked a lot of really good questions, very complimentary. We actually had one Wisconsin fan who, between the third and fourth quarter, brought his phone out and played jump around. So we all jumped around together. That was really cool. We had one sitting right in front of us that in the third quarter went and bought an Alabama koozie to cover his drink. So my 5-year-old would keep trash talking him as he kept telling us he is now converted to an Alabama fan so he could be left alone. But just it was probably one of the more enjoyable games I've had in Bryant Denny Stadium. That is a big game because there wasn't this bickering back and forth and trash talk. It was enjoyable for me with the Wisconsin fans that I was around watching the game and watch both of the teams play, and of course enjoyable with how we played on Saturday as well.
So where I was at, we actually had some Wisconsin fans in the area that I was at. Very similar experience. Really nice people. Talked to a couple of them as we were actually going up the elevator to our seats, and then during the game at halftime, and then even post game as we were waiting for the crowds to die back down. You know what the funniest thing is? The biggest thing that they were surprised at when they were talking to me and a couple other people, is that they could not believe that Alabama did not have a lottery and we couldn't buy Powerball tickets last week. They were like, "What? You got no?" And because someone had mentioned about, yeah, I had to drive so and so someplace to get tickets, and that just shocked them. But it is nice when you have some of these interconference matchups when you don't have the history of hatred that you do with other SEC opponents, and you do end up with a more mutual admiration of the two programs and much more respect. Sometimes I kind of wish it could be like that way with the SEC, but we have too deep a history and we have too much hatred among the fan bases. It'll never be like that. But when you mix it up a little bit, that's always a nice thing.
Well, sorry to disappoint them about the lottery tickets. They must not have known they were in the Bible Belt.
Yeah.
And with a dad who grew up in Coleman, I've always, I know Coleman County recently went, maybe not recently, but was one of the last counties to go wet in Alabama. I guess for Wisconsin fans, Tuscaloosa, hasn't been a problem for a long time because I know they were enjoying their beverages on Saturday as well.
Yeah, same here growing up in Fayette County. So Fayette County was also one of the last ones that went wet. It was a dry county for a long, long time. So a lot of people made those runs to the county line, especially the Tuscaloosa County line when I was growing up.
Yeah. Well, we'll get into it. I know when we were going back and forth, was it going to be our 5 favorite players or was it going to be our 10 favorite players? And I went with the 10 option because thought it'd be easy to get 5, and there might be some people that we'd have to throw in to get to 10, but we'd come up with a good list of 10. Um, and as I just mentioned, Preston Dial being honorable mention, I've got a list of like 20 honorable mentions that I won't get to today. But I found this much, much tougher having to put together a list of top 10 favorite Alabama players. And of course, to maybe highlight our areas, I know you've got the glass Coke, I've got the plastic Coke. So we'll be showing that off a little bit as well. But I'm excited to get into this. And I know as we talked about before getting on, these are not in any particular order, maybe more chronological order. So since you just wet your whistle, I'll let you start it off with your 10th, or we'll start with your first player, I guess. Again, not in chronological order that you wanted to highlight from your favorite player list.
Yeah, so in honor of Coach Bryant, that's why I wanted to do the glass bottle Coke, because the first player I want to mention is from the Bryant era, toward the end of the Bryant era, but an important player for me growing up as a child. So touchdown Tony Nathan. So Woodlawn's own, one of the first players that I do remember the championship season of basically 78, when you had that season, when they had the goal line stand against Penn State. But 78 season was probably really the first season that I really started kind of understanding and remembering some of the players. So I would have been 9 years old during the 78 season. I remember Tony Nathan. Really, for Tony Nathan, though, I became even bigger fan when he went to the Miami Dolphins. So when he played for the Dolphins in the early 80s. So my childhood then was Alabama football on Saturday and then the Miami Dolphins on Sunday, because at that time, Channel 13 out of Birmingham, NBC had the AFC, And because there were no teams close to Birmingham, we got all the AFC East teams. So every Sunday, I would either see the Dolphins, Jets, Bills, Colts, those teams play. But we saw a lot of the Miami Dolphins. And they had Tony Nathan, they had Don McNeil, they had Bob Baumhauer, and Dwight Stevenson. So they had all Alabama players. So that's how I kind of locked onto the Dolphins and have been. But Tony Nathan was the foundational piece. Started, like I said, when I was 9 years old, and then just carried on with his career with the Miami Dolphins.
It's a great one to start with. Similar for me as far as childhood growing up. First player that I'm going to mention is Dennis Riddle. So Dennis Riddle, running back from 1994 to 1997, had one of the tinted visors on his helmet, so that was always really cool. The 1996 season is, I can still vividly remember games from that season. I know I was going to Alabama games before that, but the 1996 season is where I feel like a lot of what I remember as far as Alabama football really started. And I was fortunate enough to go to Legion Field for that Iron Bowl. Where we came back and beat Auburn 24-23. And without Freddie Kitchens hitting Dennis Riddle on those swing passes down the sidelines, we would not have gotten that 76 yards that we needed to be able to come back in that game after starting up 17-0. Dennis Riddle was such a fan favorite in our house. There was a dog named Riddle in our house growing up.
Oh, that's great.
I think Riddle was used as some early passwords as we got computers coming into our house. But he was a fan favorite in the Branch household as we were growing up.
Dennis Riddle, Goodwin, Central Zone. So I remember Dennis Riddle.
Right.
And then I remember after that game, Coach Stallings announced his retirement in the press room. All right, so I'm still in the Brian era for me because I'm older than you. So I'm going to go from Tony Nathan, and I'm going to go to the very next year, the '79 season, when they're going for the repeat. I'm going to go with Stedman Shealy, the quarterback for the Wishbone team that repeated. The thing about Stedman Shealy, now in the '79 season, I really started paying attention and understanding the players. And of course, you knew who the quarterback was Stedman Shealy. One personal story is, Stedman graduated in the spring of 1980. My mother had gone back to school to get a degree in education so she could teach. So she also graduated in May of 1980. And we were out on the quad. They were having like post-graduation celebration. And I remember Stedman Shealy was out there for graduation out there. And I can't remember which building he's in front of, but I remember my mom and my dad took me over there. We stood in line to shake his hand, and he signed a graduation piece of paper for me. I wish I have lost that thing over the years, and I hate that. But that was a great memory for me. So at that time, I would have been 10 years old, and I was just in awe to go up to Stedman Shealy, say hi to him, shake his hand, and then he signed something for me. So that was a great memory for me with Stedman Shealy.
So my next player, I'm sticking with running back, and it's got to be Sean Alexander. And I feel like, ever since we've had this run of running backs and really become maybe considered running back use, Sean Alexander sometimes gets a little bit lost in the shuffle from the late 1990s. But started, of course, with that performance he had against LSU in Baton Rouge, going for 276 yards, I think it was, and 4 touchdowns. And of course, then becoming really the bell cow in 1998. And of course, for me, the first, I feel like, real season of Alabama football of what knowing what really good Alabama football is. That 1996 team was good, but that 1999 team, even though they lost to Louisiana Tech, they bounced back and would eventually compete and play for the SEC championship. Sean Alexander being in the Heisman race, should have been invited to New York. If he doesn't get injured after the Tennessee game, he probably does get invited to New York at some point. Was a great representation for the University of Alabama, great man of faith. It was also great as a young kid for him to be on the cover of what I think was NCAA Football 2000 at that point, and then we wouldn't get another Alabama player on the cover until Mark Ingram. And then for us too, just kind of growing up, we didn't have this huge run of Alabama skill players in the NFL at that time. David Palmer was kind of on the tail end of his career. So Sean Alexander going to the Seahawks and being their main running back and having success where he would eventually win the MVP in the NFL and help lead the Seahawks to the Super Bowl. He was a great running back to follow and, brought a lot of that, Alabama history or just gave the feels of what Alabama of the old was because of the success that he had on the field and helping lead that team with Chris Samuels, as we've talked about a couple times on this podcast as we've gotten started.
Look, Sean Alexander is a great choice. I'm gonna piggyback on your choice and just say this: if you were to go back to 1999 at the end of the season and ask the Michigan Wolverine defense who's the better running back, Ron Dayne, who won the Heisman, or Sean Alexander, I'm pretty sure who they're going to pick.
Yeah.
So Sean Alexander sliced them to pieces in the Orange Bowl, and I think they held Ron Dayne to like 47 yards rushing when they played that year.
And sliced them to pieces with Chris Samuels on the sidelines.
You had Dante Ellington out there, unfortunately, getting about 10 holding calls because if you didn't have the holding call, Sean would have rushed for like 300 yards against Michigan in that game. All right, so I'm good. All right, so I'm going to also stay with running backs again. I'm going in chronological order as I grow up through the years. So I'm still staying on that 79 championship team, the back-to-back championships, and of course, you can't forget for me Major Ogilvie. So the biggest thing I remember is the championship or the Sugar Bowl game against Arkansas, the 2 touchdowns. They're both iconic to me. I mean, I know one was, I think, 1 yard, and the other was like 22-yard touchdown run, but he was running over Razorbacks left and right. And again, Major Ogilvie was definitely one that stuck in my memory along with Stedman Shealy off that team. So, and if I'm not mistaken, I believe that's Major Applewhite was named after Major Ogilvie at the time, all those years ago. So his legacy lives on. But I was also a big, huge Major Ogilvie fan. I hate that I couldn't get his autograph too when I saw Stedman Shealy. That would have been great if I could have got both from that time when I was 10 years old.
Well, I've had the opportunity living here in Birmingham to meet Major Ogilvie several times. I actually went to school with his son, Morgan. Morgan was a year younger than me at Mountain Brook when we both went to school together. Morgan's definitely in that honorable mention category as far as favorite players because, of course, I've gotten to know him, but he was a walk-on quarterback at Alabama after playing at Mountain Brook. And also gotten to know Major's daughter, Mary Riley Ogilvie, which she was a great athlete at Mountain Brook as well. So first class people, that's can't go wrong with Major Ogilvie. And you are correct, Major Applewhite was named after Major Ogilvie. All right, so in keeping with the theme of that 1988, 1999, next player that I'm going to is Andrew Zow. And Alabama fans love their quarterbacks. Of course, the quarterback gets the most cheers almost every time when they do the starting lineups. So when Andrew Zow finally took over after taking over for John David Phillips in the 1998 game in Florida, which was always funny to me that John David Phillips was our quarterback to start the 1998 season because I think he converted from linebacker to play quarterback at Alabama from that season. But Andrew Zow, one of the first quarterbacks that I can remember that really could throw the ball. Freddie Kitchens could throw the ball, but was not always accurate. Still love Freddie. Definitely the honorable mention category. But Andrew Zow and being part of that team that went to the SEC championship game, and a guy that had to split a lot of plays with Tyler Watts. They both had a unique skill set that was beneficial for that 99 team. And they would continue to have to, split series and things like that, of course, through 2000 and 2001. But I always thought Andrew Zow carried himself well. The 2001, we don't make a bowl game in 2001 without Andrew Zow stepping in after Tyler Watts had gotten hurt and had pretty much, played all the snaps up until that point. But Andrew Zow comes in, he beats Auburn they had Cadillac and Ronnie Williams. I think beat them 31-7. Then we had to go play basically in a monsoon in Legion Field against Southern Miss to get bowl eligible, and then he would lead us to beating Iowa State in the Independence Bowl for his last game. But Andrew Zow, big fan of Andrew Zow. No, he's over at Clemson coaching right now, having maybe not as much success this year right now, but has had a lot of success in the past. But he's in that. There's a long line of Alabama quarterbacks because I played quarterback and that was my position on the football team. So always liked following those Alabama quarterbacks, and Andrew Zow is one of the first ones that comes to mind.
I know when we get to the Iron Bowl week, we'll probably talk about our favorite Iron Bowl memories, but I'm going to tell you that 2001 game down at Auburn was a great one for me.
It's
That was the easiest ride back I've ever had from Auburn because
yes.
the crowd was empty by the middle of the fourth quarter. So, no, loved Andrew Zhao. All right, for me, again, going with the progression of me growing up, I'm going to go with Jeremiah Castile. Jeremiah, of course, in Coach Bryant's final game, which was the very cold Liberty Bowl in that December, Jeremiah Castile made sure that Coach Bryant was not going to go out with a loss. I mean, he single-handedly picked off Tony Eason 3 times. And just think about this. A defensive back was named MVP of the Liberty Bowl because of what Jeremiah Castile did. And Jeremiah would hit. He wasn't the biggest player out there, but he would lay the wood. You know, when they play the tradition video, you know, in the stadium, they always have that shot of Jeremiah coming in and just crushing the Illinois receiver and knocking the ball so it's an incomplete pass. Well, that was the Liberty Bowl, and that was Jeremiah out there just going all out. I mean, Jeremiah was a great player, had a good career with the Denver Broncos when he went to the NFL. But I remember I would have been 13, but I remember that Liberty Bowl meant so much because I wanted to see Coach Bryant go out with a win. And then you could tell that Jeremiah also did too. And I always respected how hard he played in that game. You can go back, if you look at the game on YouTube, just go back and watch him out there hustling all over the place. So a lot of respect for Jeremiah Castile for what he's done. He sent his sons to the team. I think at Briarwood Christian, I guess he was also like the chaplain for the team. So Jeremiah's done a great thing, many great things for the University of Alabama. A great person and someone that I enjoyed watching play when I was growing up.
Yeah, phenomenal person. I've had the opportunity to listen to him speak a couple times. Has a great testimony. I definitely agree with a hard hitter. The next one and it's probably good timing as I go into my next one. He was a hard hitter. He may have been the toughest Alabama player I've seen, and that's Lane Bearden, the punter, the early
Yes.
2000s. Many people not remember, 44, and I'm not talking about 44 Forrest Gump. I'm talking about 44 Lane Bearden. He did kickoffs, he did punts, played a huge role in that game against Oklahoma in Norman back in 2002. In that same season, I think was running a fake punt against Arkansas and would end up tearing his ACL in that game. We would later play Georgia that year and probably lost that Georgia game because Lane was not available because our backup punter just didn't have the leg that Lane had and was struggling a little bit. And Lane actually came back to the team and punted with the torn ACL the remainder of his senior year. But he was always a guy as far as just, middle school kids we loved because of his toughness. He would hit you. If we didn't cover and it was Lane against the kick returner, Lane was going to take you out. But as far as just tough guys that you could really rally around, that was Lane Bearden.
The fact that he played the rest of the season with a torn ACL is all you need to know. So, I mean, you're not going to see anybody do that nowadays. So no. He was not a typical kicker. He was tough as nails. I remember him. Okay, so I think we're almost halfway through because now I'm up to number 5 on my end. So number 5 for me is a really special one, and is a quarterback. So now I'm going quarterback. So I'm going to go with Walter Lewis. Several reasons here with Walter Lewis. So the 315 game, Coach Bryant, where he broke the record for Amos Alonzo Stagg. Sorry, when he broke that record. If you remember, Walter Lewis was the driving force in that rally in the second half. Alabama was actually trailing to Auburn. He made a couple of deep passes and rallied Alabama to get that game for him. And then from that point on, he was the quarterback that I grew up with, really. I really followed every single game when he was the quarterback all the way until he graduated and finished with Coach Perkins. So Walter meant a lot to me. And the summer of 1984, this would have been probably June or mid-July. I was actually in the Memphis airport with my brother-in-law. My sister and her family lived in Wichita, Kansas. So I was actually going to go spend a couple of weeks with them for the summer. So I was with my brother-in-law in the Memphis airport, and this was back before 9/11 happened. So you didn't have to have a ticket to go to a gate. It was just wide open. Anyone could go anywhere. But we're sitting there waiting on our flight, and I look up, and someone comes walking up and literally sits right across from us, there at the gate. And when I saw it, I said, that looks just like Walter Lewis. And remember, he played for the Memphis Showboats. So I was sitting there, I was like, yeah, that's Walter Lewis. But I was so nervous because at the time I just turned 15. I couldn't say a word. I was just like, I want to say hi, but I can't. I was actually wearing an Alabama hat. So he sees the hat, and the first thing he says after he looks at me, he goes, are you an Alabama fan? And I was like, yes, sir. And I said, can I ask you a question? And he's like, what? I said, are you Walter Lewis? He said, I am. So it was great. He was there to pick up a friend that was coming in. So he was going to pick him up at the airport. He sat there for the next 30 minutes talking to me and my brother-in-law. Greatest time, greatest thrill of my young life. And of course, you know, we didn't have a camera. I would have given anything for a Polaroid camera so I could have gotten a picture with Walter Lewis. But that meant the world to me. Walter was so nice to us there at the airport. We had a great time that time.
I think we're halfway through. I'm about to share another quarterback, but a constant theme that I keep hearing from you, and I hope that I'm sharing as well, especially a lot of these players that we've gotten to meet, whether it's for a minute, whether it's 5 minutes, whether it's 30 minutes. These guys, even before NIL and all that, these guys are getting pulled at by Alabama fans because we're fanatics. We love our Alabama football players. And at least all the Alabama football players that I've had an opportunity to meet, get to know, are just so gracious with their time. Great people, nice people. And the one that about to mention is another falls right in that category, and that's Greg McElroy. So I got to know Greg. I was at Alabama from 2007 to 2011. I got to know Greg very well during that time. Still see him a couple times in Birmingham throughout the year. You want to talk about a guy who is so knowledgeable about football. He is, if you can watch him without it being an Alabama game, because I know some people think he's biased and some people say he's not biased enough. So get that out. Just watch him call a football game. He and Sean McDonough remind me a lot of Ron Franklin and Mike Godfrey. They're very good together. And Greg is just so knowledgeable about the game. I remember he and I were sitting together, one spring afternoon watching the 2009 NFL draft. And he knows, I know his dad worked for the Cowboys and worked in the NFL, but Greg knew everything, not only about every NFL team, but every player that was being drafted, and had phenomenal things to say about them. Greg had to win the starting job over Star Jackson right after John Parker Wilson had run out of eligibility. And he was always considered the game manager of the game manager. Well, the game manager won us that game against Florida in the SEC championship that would allow us to then eventually go play Texas. And, I know he only threw 6 passes in that game, but we didn't need, to throw a bunch of passes against Texas. We had the game basically sewn up in the first half, almost let them back in. But Greg's been really great to me. He's really great to my brother when he was a starting quarterback as well, just being a resource and being able to talk to. Big fan of Greg McElroy, and very excited that we get to listen to him on Saturdays call football because he knows the game so well.
I know he does take a lot of heat from Alabama fans, but again, he's just being a professional. He's doing
Right.
he's doing what he's supposed to do. So I know it's not again, it's a tough job. But if half the people love you and half the people hate you, you're doing what you're supposed to be doing.
Yep.
How about that?
Yep.
All right. So you can sense a theme for me. So my formative years were the late 70s and in the 80s. So most of all these players are going to come from that era. So I'm going to stick with the same era because now we're going to migrate to the one and only Cornelius Biscuit. So he was a prized recruit for Ray Perkins in his first class coming in, played as a true freshman in 1983. And you could tell, just like Bo Jackson, when he arrived on campus, he was ready to go. He was a grown man on campus, and they unleashed him. And Cornelius Bennett had a great career with Coach Perkins. The Notre Dame game with the infamous sack against Berline, me and a friend from high school, we were in the upper deck at Legion Field, hot, sweaty. But when he leveled Berline, you could hear that just echo throughout the stadium. And my friend said, that's a fumble. That's a fumble. And I agree. If they had instant replay, that was a fumble. Cornelius Bennett deserved that. And I used to always remember on ABC television when they used to do Alabama games back then in the 80s, one of the biggest fans of Cornelius Bennett was Tim Brandt, the sideline reporter. He would always talk about how good Cornelius Bennett was compared to Lawrence Taylor. He said he's the best college linebacker I've ever seen. And I would agree. At that point, he was the greatest college linebacker I ever saw until maybe we get to another player later on down the list. But loved Cornelius Bennett. And, he's had some good interaction actually with me on Twitter on a couple, or X on a couple of things. So I appreciate his support on some of the things that we post. I always try to post whenever I can with Cornelius Bennett. I love putting video clips out there of all the plays that he made, because he made a lot of them there when he was at Alabama.
He also seems to be a fan of the white helmets, so that should
Yes, he does. He
him
likes
some.
the white helmets.
Um, I know he didn't make my list, but he's become a favorite in our house because we actually have a baby size 97 jersey that my in-laws have had that we've thrown on our boys when they were in those infant stages. So a lot of our Alabama pictures, especially at home, are in a 97 biscuit jersey. Next guy that I'm going to is a wide receiver that maybe many people don't know or forgotten of, but it's Mike McCoy. Mike McCoy was at Alabama from 2006 to 2009. It's a guy I got to know very well, too, while we were in Tuscaloosa. He was around, the Julio Jones, when Julio Jones was coming in as well. But you talk about one of the nicest guys that I've ever gotten to meet. And he's another guy that's not necessarily directly in football, but having a lot of success in the athletic world. And I didn't run this by him beforehand or anything like that. But if you're a high school athlete, or you got a high school athlete or middle schooler that plays football, or really any athletics, especially in the Birmingham area, Mike's got his own gym called the Warehouse Institute, and he worked with my brother, 10, 15 years ago when he was playing wide receiver in high school. And Hunter would eventually go on to get a scholarship to play football at Furman, and then turn that athleticism into playing rugby at Furman.
Oh, wow.
But Mike, obviously learning from Scott Cochran and some other, professionals in that world, Mike does a phenomenal job. He cranks out Division I athletes. If you're interested, you can obviously comment, reach out to me directly, but besides that, Mike was a joy to be around in Tuscaloosa and one of my favorite guys to be around. I'm a big fan of Mike McCoy, and all the success that he's already earned and will continue to earn. He greatly deserves it.
That's great to hear about Mike. He was a good look. He was a blue collar wide receiver.
Yes.
How about that?
Yes.
Definitely. All right, we're going to stick with Mike's because I'm going to stay with another Mike here in the 80s, and I'm going to go with Mike Shula. There's a lot of the younger generation fans that, again, may know Mike Shula, the coach, and you never really got a chance to see Mike Shula, the player. And I had a lot of respect for Mike Shula, the player, the left-handed quarterback. Look, he came here with a famous last name, so he's already got that kind of burden over him to prove something, kind of like Manning's, but maybe not to that level, obviously. But I really appreciate what Mike did in 1984. He started the year against Boston College, had the rally with Doug Flutie, lost that one. Coach Perkins put Vince Sutton in for several games in midseason, and that 84 season just didn't go very well. But don't forget, toward the end of the year, went back to Mike Shula. He kept the job. He was what you needed. They had the great 17-15 game upset against Auburn in Legion Field. That was the first Alabama-Auburn game I saw in person. And then, of course, that was just a warm-up for the 85 season. So you had the rally at Athens against Georgia where he hits Al Bell. He led a rally in Death Valley against LSU to tie the game 14-14. And then, of course, the memorable 25-23 game in 85 in Legion Field. So the 85 season, Mike Shula, he was very instrumental. He was calm under pressure, and you saw it in those last-minute drives. So I have all the respect in the world for Mike Shula, the player, and what he did for the university. I hope people remember more about Mike Shula, what he did as a player, instead of kind of like picking on him as a coach, because I have nothing but fond memories for Mike Shula.
A clip came up from the last drive in 1985 against Auburn. And of course, being a quarterback, and you think about the, hitting Gene Jelks and hitting out Al Bell and all that. But I forgot, that drive stalls out, or we don't get to move the ball down the field. He doesn't make that block on the end around.
On the reverse, yes.
Which would probably nowadays be called a blindside block. But he laid it out, and if he doesn't make it, we're not talking about one of the more famous plays in Alabama football history. More than likely. I'm going to jump around in eras a little bit, and but I'm going to stay with quarterbacks. And I'm actually going to Mac Jones, and it's not recency bias because of what he just did for the 49ers this past weekend. But when you talk about guys who just, committed to Alabama, committed to, the A, and then going out and having success. Mac Jones has been brought up a lot with what Ty Simpson is doing at Alabama, sticking around and not transferring, anything like that. I mean, Mac was behind Jalen Hurts and Tua Tagovailoa, but he stayed committed to the process. He got phenomenal coaching, and I think he was the director of. Everybody talks about the LSU 2019 offense. Yeah, I'm biased. I think our 2020 offense is the most prolific offense in college football. Of course, you had DeVonta Smith, and you had Jalen Waddle, and you had John Mechie, you had Najee Harris. You couldn't stop us. I mean, the Ole Miss game that, yeah, it was a peak Golden Classic where we won 62-48 against Lane Kiffin. But I don't think we had a single third down in the second half at Ole Miss. I was just really impressed with Mac that he stayed committed to the process and he got to experience the fruits of his labor basically that whole 2020 season. And what I think is the best of the Saban teams, obviously going undefeated against all SEC competition and making the playoff, having an undefeated season in a really tough era of college football with COVID. So that's why I put Mac Jones in my list. Just very appreciative of what he did and sticking around because he was also a guy too that everybody thought Bryce Young was just going to come in and be the starter. And he blocked out all the noise, did his job, and I think he deserves huge accolades for doing that.
And he did that all under the specter of COVID. You had all the COVID distractions going on too. So that 2020 offense is one of the greatest in college football history, not Alabama history. So, okay. My next player, still, I'm stuck in the 80s. Sorry, it's just kind of like a repeat here. I'm going to go with Van Tiffen. So to me, is my favorite kicker. I'm not going to say greatest kicker, but my favorite kicker in Alabama history for what he did. And of course, we all remember the 52-yard field goal with no time left to beat Auburn. Heck of a kick. He was cool as can be. He never looked rattled, never looked nervous. He had the same expression. He was like the pre-Jalen Hurts. You could never tell what mood Van Tiffen was in. He just always looked stoic, no matter what. Just clutch. Came out there, drilled that one. I remember earlier that season in the second game of the year too, when he kicked the still record 57-yard field goal against Texas A&M right before half. He nails that one. Now look, I know people will say, well, he kicked off a tee. Yes, he kicked off a tee. Everyone kicked off a tee back then. But he made the kicks. I remember in the 83 Iron Bowl, he's trying to kick a field goal in the middle of a hurricane and tornado warning. So that's how they used to play football back in the 80s. You had all that going on. But, Van was a walk-on from Red Bay. He actually earned a scholarship. Coach Perkins finally was so impressed he gave him a scholarship. And I would say Van Tiffen earned every bit of it. Never missed an extra point in his entire career. And then he had all those clutch field goals. So I have lots of great memories of all the stuff that Van Tiffen did for the team in the 80s.
And helped and had a son that obviously went to
Yep.
Alabama and Lee and kicked a lot of big field goals for us, especially in that 2009 season. We'll put Lee in the honorable mention category as well. So sticking with kind of that 2020 COVID area, I'm going to go to John Mechie. And I'm a big John Mechie fan, but I think more so my boys are a huge John Mechie fan. Obviously a great wide receiver at Alabama. Without John Mechie and of course Jameson Williams, we don't make it to that national championship game with Bryce in 2021. Obviously brought the Crimson Crane to Alabama. There's a lot of Alabama fans that are probably split on the whole ninja symbol because once those ninja symbols started coming up on X and people's names, we didn't have as good of luck as we did in a lot of Alabama programs, but that's okay. That's been a staple of Alabama, even though Bruce Pearl would like to claim it just to bring in some basketball, which I wasn't going to tell this story. I was going to wait until the Florida State game, but it seems relevant for this. Florida State game this year. I'm at my parents' lake house, and there's a commotion out by the lake with all family. And Bruce Pearl is on a bass fishing boat with Keyshawn Hall, some professional bass fisherman and his agent who went to Auburn, and they're asking, can they park at my family's dock and come film a bit of rolling the trees within at my parents' lake house, and that my dad can yell at them from the porch to quit doing that. Bruce is very nice. He's got a very polished roll tide. So he'll be ready to roll that out here in a couple months, I think, as he steps into a new arena. But what I remembered when I was putting this list together with John Mechie is my youngest was wearing a John Mechie t-shirt on that Saturday of the Florida State game, doing the Crimson Crane. And he was in that picture with Bruce Pearl on that Saturday wearing his John Mechie t-shirt. So as much as Bruce Pearl wanted to claim that this was Auburn's thing when Grant Nelson did it in the basketball game this year, like a good politician, he was off on that one. That has been an Alabama thing that came from John Mechie. And obviously, Mechie's, story battling cancer and now still being in the NFL and being with the Eagles, he's got a special place within the Branch household as far as being one of our favorite players.
Nelson does the crane better than Bruce Pearl on that one, no doubt. Okay,
I've seen many 5-year-olds do a better Crimson Crane than Bruce Pearl.
Oh, that's funny. Next to last choice, this may be controversial, but when I was growing up, there was a period when I was the biggest Gene Jelks fan you could find, especially in that 85 season when he was a freshman, along with another freshman named Bobby Humphrey. But I remember some of the runs that Gene Jelks had, and let's not forget that fourth quarter when he had that 74-yard touchdown run. Bo Jackson had given Auburn the lead, 17-16 in the fourth quarter. And Jelks comes right back with one of the best runs I've ever seen. I still watch that on YouTube. I just still get, goosebumps watching him do that run. I'll say this about Gene Jelks. To me, and I'm not saying this is all the fault of just one thing, but I never understood why the Bill Curry coaching staff moved him to cornerback and did not let him stay in the backfield with Bobby Humphrey, because I always thought the team of Humphrey and Jelks was a good tandem to have. So, and I know Gene was very disappointed with that. He didn't say it at the time, but you knew he was, even when he was returning punts. But I always felt Gene Jelks should have stayed at running back, should have been back there with Bobby Humphrey. And, of course, we know all the controversy that came later after the Eric Ramsey situation with Auburn and then the Gene Jelks allegations. But I'm going to tell you, during that period for me growing up, I was a huge Gene Jelks fan. He actually came and spoke at the Berry Athletic Banquet one year. And this was, I think, after his sophomore or junior year, and he was great. I mean, we had a great conversation to everyone there. We were all Gene Jelks fans. I hope things are going well for Gene. I would like to say that because, when I was growing up, Gene Jelks meant a lot to me, and I really appreciate everything he did during his playing time in Alabama.
Yeah, I feel like many Alabama teams in the past have always had two great running backs. Of course, Trent and Mark, Sherman Williams, Derek Lassick, Dennis Riddle, Sean Alexander, and you could throw Curtis Alexander in there as well. Ahmad Galloway, Brandon Maurice, Antonio Beard, Shawd Williams. It hasn't always been just one guy. It's been multiple guys that can carry the rock for us, and that would have been a great tandem of Gene Jelks and Bobby Humphrey together. Next player I'm going to is Brian Branch. I think that's obvious. When you got the last name Branch, you got to be a favorite in the Branch household. But not just having the last name Branch. Brian was obviously been a great football player for us. There might be some recency bias in there as well. But one of the top safeties during his time at Alabama over the past couple of years, now doing a great job for the Detroit Lions. We actually have a Detroit Lions Brian Branch jersey in our house right now. So yeah, we'll definitely be Team Branch for sure within the Branch household.
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one. Wow, we're at the end for both of us. The last player, and this is really a line of demarcation for me when it comes to what we talk about our favorite Alabama players. So my last player is Derek Thomas. So his senior year of 1988, we know what he did. He was just unbelievable. The Penn State game when they won 8-3, and basically Derek Thomas beat Penn State all by himself. It was like watching the Waterboy movie. How ironic that the Penn State quarterback's last name was Saka. So, Derek was all over him. Don't forget, against Kentucky, I think he had like 14 tackles and 4 sacks against Kentucky that year. But the reason why I say it's an important line for me with Derek Thomas is because the following year in 1989, I covered my first Alabama game. And then my perception of the team or how I related to the team and the coaches really started to change. So, I mean, the mystique of Alabama football players and the aura kind of started to change after that. So Derek Thomas, the last of that class that still has that fond memories of me as me growing up, because I only knew them as the players. I knew them as the football legends. Starting in 1989, that really started to change. I'm not going to say that it's not a bad thing, but again, you always look back at when you were growing up. Those are the players, those are the teams, those are the ones that you remember, and those are the ones that you have the warmest memories about. And so for me, that cycle of my life really changed with Derek Thomas after that. And then it started this new cycle of where now I was covering players. I actually got to talk to them, know them, and it changes things a little bit. Doesn't mean you don't like them, doesn't mean you don't enjoy it, but it's just a different feeling. And so it's, never be the same. So that's why I still have the fond memories of the 10 players that we just talked about, because those are all the ones that I grew up with.
Yeah, Derek Thomas obviously is, name etched in Crimson Flame in Alabama. He would have been playing for the Chiefs as I was growing up. Obviously, a guy that left us way too soon. As you were talking about Derek Thomas, it reminded me, I remember him getting in the car crash. Remember, it was around basketball season. I remember, Coleman Coliseum before it got renovated. You used to walk in and they kind of had the University of Alabama seal in the middle of the floor in the lobby, and they had the trophy cases, and then you'd walk through the doors to get into the concourse. They had a big, get well soon card that people were signing for him. And then a couple days later, as probably a fourth grader, I'm going to lunch at elementary school, and there's my mom just there to tell me that, Derek Thomas had passed away. A guy that, would have been fun for him to still be around, especially during the Saban area with so many great linebackers that we've had, even though nobody has touched his sack record, but just to hear his commentary about what these defenses have looked like in Alabama, and just for him to continue to be coming back to Tuscaloosa and getting the recognition that he deserves for some incredible defensive statistics that will probably never be touched ever again, as far as Alabama players.
He was special. He was very special.
But talking about special players, my last one is special to me. He's a really good friend, and I mean good friend that we've grown up together. Elementary school, junior high school, high school. He was originally born in Athens, Greece, and moved to Birmingham, Alabama. It's number 73, William Vlahos. It was fun getting to use his picture when we scored 73 points against Museum Monroe this year, but William's been a really, really good friend through life. Played a lot of football together. Actually, going back to Andrew Zau's first appearance at quarterback in 1998 against Florida in Tuscaloosa, William was at that game with me, one of his first Alabama games to attend. And I remember when he called me right after he committed to Alabama, and that's when Coach Shula was still head coach at Alabama at that time. And I remember, our high school season had ended. Shula had just been fired, and Joe Kynes had reached out to him and left a message, and he played the message for me that Joe Kynes left. And Joe Kynes was talking about, William, I don't know what's going to happen, but this is Alabama football. Just stick with it. You're going to be fine. Whoever comes in is going to be fine. Of course, we didn't know it was Nick Saban at that point, and we didn't know how fine we were going to be. But William was a guy, that many considered undersized as well. Before NIL, he was considered, a gray shirt option, but came into Alabama in 2007, redshirted, would eventually win the starting center job at Alabama. And it's just wild to be in the Rose Bowl for that 2009 national championship game between, Texas, and there's your childhood friend as starting center for Alabama, the team that you've grown up loving, forever. And you're seeing him go win a national championship. And then you're watching him doing it again on TV in 2011 against LSU. And he's been a part of two other national championship teams as an analyst for Alabama in 2015 and 2017. Currently at Miami with Coach Cristobal as an assistant down there on the offensive side. But we've had great linemen. William maybe doesn't get the shine as much as those others have in the past, but he's a great friend of mine, and I've gotten to a lot of these guys that I mentioned, like I got to meet through having that relationship with William. So William will always be my top favorite Alabama football player.
That's a good choice, especially look, I think the thing we both touched upon is we talk about players that mean something to us on a deep emotional level. And that's what's great. I mean, that's what makes it special. We either have met them in person, we grew up with them, or again, we grew up watching them as children, and that's where the connection comes.
Absolutely. We probably should put a disclaimer. Josh McMillan and Mac Herford cannot be selected as favorite players since they're the host of the M3 show, which is a Crimson crossover production. So we don't want their feelings to be hurt. But yeah, I mean, when I was going through this list, I think of guys like Brad Smelly, Barrett Jones, Hardy Buck, who was a walk-on but special teams warrior. Freddie Millens, Javier Arenas. Javier Arenas, I was thinking today, is probably the first high school football recruit that received the Bama bump. Before committing to Alabama, he had 0 stars. After he committed to Alabama, he was a 3-star prospect. But I mean, I'm sure you got a list of that, of so many guys that it's hard to put 10 together of who your favorite Alabama players are.
I just had to go, like I said, I kind of just confined it to my pre-professional period when the players just seemed to be just, I don't know, like I said, on a heroic level almost based on me growing up with them. So I'm not saying it was easy to pick those 10. There are a lot of other ones I could have picked on there too that I also watched, but I do like the list that I came up with. And look, if Coca-Cola is watching, we would love to have you as a sponsor.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't feel like I could open mine. I thought there was something about Nick Saban, when he was up there, that the Coke, that was put on the podium, it was 10 years expired. So I just have to sit in my office for a while. But
now Coach Brian and Charlie Thornton used to drink them, so they would drink the Cokes and eat potato chips. They would do both.
But, and one of the great things about Alabama football and all the players that we've had is our lists are going to be completely different from so many different Alabama football fans. And we'd love to hear from Alabama football fans that are listening to this, whether you want to comment, or reply on X, comment, in the podcast, or comment in YouTube. You don't have to send us your top 10. Send us your favorite player, but we'd love to hear from you. And I'm sure there's ways over the next several games, especially as we get into more SEC history with some of these opponents, that we'll be able to talk about some of these players and some of those moments they've had in those games too. So, please like and subscribe to the Tide Machine. Follow us on X. Please like and subscribe to our other Crimson Crossover podcast. Obviously, I just mentioned the M3 show. We just started Golf Adjacent with Cannon Clone. About to get Crips Crossover kicked off here again pretty soon. And Michael, I know you may be working on something that we'll share at a later date with people.
Yep.
But this has been really fun because it's not just reading off a bunch of names, as you mentioned. It's emotional connections that we get to share. And I think that's one of the great things we've had it in Alabama basketball, our group, but in Alabama football too, to share great moments, great history, great emotions to players, to plays, to teams, to seasons. And again, even though it's Michael and I here talking, we want to hear from you as well and share those with you too. So please, comment. We'd love to talk more about some of the things that y'all want to hear as well.
Absolutely. This has been a lot of fun. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah. And the good thing is we're going to have another off week, and we'll get to have another fun discussion. We'll figure out what that'll be, but this has definitely been a good in-between as we get ready for Georgia next week. I'm going to go ahead and tell you, I think next week's going to be a lot of fun getting to talk about an SEC opponent. There's going to be a lot of games that we get to talk about, and not only it being an SEC opponent, but of course a very big game coming up against Georgia. So y'all be on the lookout, of course, next week for our podcast talking about the Alabama-Georgia series. Please like and subscribe. Follow us on X at the Tide Machine. And we look forward to getting back with you next week talking about Alabama and Georgia. Roll Tide.
Roll Tide.
Paul W. Bryant Museum is a captivating destination for sports enthusiasts and fans of the University of Alabama football program. Located in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, the museum is dedicated to preserving the legacy of the legendary coach Paul Bear Bryant. The Paul W. Bryant Museum showcases a remarkable collection of memorabilia, including trophies, photographs, and artifacts that span Bryant's career and the rich history of Alabama football. Visitors can explore interactive exhibits and learn about the team's storied past, making the Paul W. Bryant Museum a must-visit for any football aficionado. Fans can also experience exhibits highlighting success of both the Alabama men's basketball and women's softball programs. Open Tuesday through Sunday. Plan your visit today and experience the rich tradition of Alabama athletics. Roll Tide.